Hello, everyone, and welcome to our grant writing training. My name is Kate Chapin, and I serve as the Executive Director for the University of Montana Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development. And I am joined by my colleagues, Jeff Folsom, who serves as our Director of Policy and Special Projects, and Mary Collins, who is a Program Manager who focuses on building the capacity of agencies and organizations across Western Montana. So I want to tell you a little bit about our center before we dive into the plan for the day. So our team of 30 work closely with the state's human service, health, education, public health, and justice systems to bolster the workforce, to improve efficacy and the quality of care, to enhance cross-system collaboration, and to influence policies that generally support the health and wellness of Montana's children and families. So our approach generally falls into these three buckets: workforce development and training, capacity building and technical assistance, and then research and evaluation. So similar to the Montana Public Health Training Center, a lot of our work is focused on training the workforce. And so we're excited to be here today to have the opportunity to share with you all our experience both writing and administering grants. We know that grant writing and our grant writing skills are needed for public health professionals and human service agency professionals, all agencies, because in order to do the important work, the essential work of serving Montana, we need funding. We need funding to be able to do the work. And we also know that grant writing is time consuming, that you're often balancing multiple tasks at the same time that you're trying to write grants. And so we want to give you some of those skills and knowledge so that you can walk away from the training both today and next week with some real tangible skills to get started. So a little bit about the plan. So this is a two-part training. So we're going to have 2 hours today, and then again, we'll meet next week, and same time, same day, Thursday next week, and we'll finish up the second 2 hours of the training. So our plan for today, the spirit of today, is really this idea of go slow to go fast. So we want to give you some real tangible ways that you can prepare for your next grant. So we're going to talk about types of funding, the ingredients of a fundable project. We're going to also give you a tool to look at how you can assess your readiness to apply for a grant. And then we're going to talk about tips for writing grants. And then we're going to conclude today with a kind of some examples or some ideas about how to look for and search for funding opportunities. Next week, when we come back, we're gonna really get into the nitty-gritty of understanding the anatomy of an RFP, and then also the essential elements of a grant proposal. How do you create a sustainable, fundable proposal? So we'll have a chance to break into groups and really roll up our sleeves and start working on these aspects. So we don't have an official break planned for the next couple hours, so do what you need to take care of yourself. There'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions when we do the breakout groups, and then we'll have a chance to do questions at the end as well. So we want to know who you are. So I'm going to list a question on the screen here, and I'd like you to type it out. And then when I say enter, I want you to hit enter. So then in the chat, we see a waterfall of your responses. So the first question here is, share your name, the town you work in, and your job title. Oh, good to see all sorts of different roles that people are representing. And then also we're getting a good scan of the state. Billings, Kalispell, Helena, Cut Bank, Madison County, Choteau. Very cool. All right, next question here. So we want to know what kind of experience is in the room. So share the number of grants you've written, including either you led the grant writing or you assisted in that proposal development. So go ahead and write that number and go. Okay, 20, 30, 2, 1, 0, 10-ish, 3, 0. All right, so we've got most 40. Okay, we're handing it over to Ashley. Oh, too many to count. Okay, so we got a range. It seems like the majority of folks have minimal experience, and then our outliers are Ashley with 40, and there was another Nancy with 30. So if you have any questions that we can't ask and we can't answer, we know who to call on. So that's great. All right. So lastly, list one trick or piece of knowledge you hope to learn from this workshop. And then go ahead and type it in, a trick, a nugget of information that you hope to learn from this workshop. Ready, go. Format and timing, how to get to the yes, basics, how this all works, like demystifying the grant process, everything, basics. Some writing tips, great, we'll cover that today. Updating skills, writing tips. Good, how to find the grant that fits your nonprofit. That's really important. Okay. All right, well, this is helpful for us, and I'm feeling good that we are prepared to address most, if not all, of the tips that you're hoping to get out of today. So now I'm going to pass it on to Mary.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so to kick us off with our learning, I am going to go over just some of the foundational, fundamental types of grants that you can expect to come across. Not all grants are made the same, and so it's important to understand how they're differentiated, some of the nuances of the different types of funding, and the ways that can impact the way in which you can do the work and what will be on your plate if you receive one. So we'll start with talking about competitive grants. And this is probably, when you think about applying for a grant, this is probably what most of you are thinking about, where some entity has funding and they put out a request for proposal or an RFP, which if you have not heard that term before and you're getting into grant writing, you will now hear all the time. And so competitive funds are really where you then put together a proposal that is then submitted to a panel of reviewers. And so that panel will then review your application to determine sort of your proposal strengths and the fit with the criteria for the funding. Typically, RFPs will include that scoring criteria so that when you're writing that proposal, you can have a sense of like, what are the evaluators, the reviewers going to be looking for, so that you can really write your grant to those needs and be able to sort of sell yourself within the competition of applying for those. Formula grants. So these are non-competitive grants. So these are where funds are distributed using a predetermined criteria. And so it's all applicants who meet that criteria will then receive the funding, although the amount might vary depending on certain benchmarks. And so, as an example, Montana as a state receives several formula grants from the federal government, and they're based upon sort of different criteria. So some are based on population. So just how many folks do you have within either the state or for you within your county? Some are based on demand for services, so how many folks are typically served by a particular program. And others might be demonstrated need. So we have things like maybe opioid related grants, where states with higher rates of opioid use or misuse are going to receive a higher amount of funding than states who don't. Continuation grants. So these can be competitive or non-competitive. They're a little in the middle. So continuation grants are really when an organization has received funding and the funder is now enabling them to apply for additional funding to continue their work. And so it could be that they're allowing you additional time. So you might have received, say, $100,000 grant for 2 years. That $100,000 hasn't been spent, and the funder is allowing you to submit a continuation proposal to use that remaining funding for additional time. Or it might be that they say, hey, your 2 years is up, you've used this funding, but we'd like to continue funding it. And so you can submit a proposal to have additional time and funding. Not all grants are eligible for this. And so that's certainly something to keep in mind. You can come across grants that are specifically like 1 year, one-time funding. A lot of times planning grants are really dedicated to just that, and there won't be an option for continuation. So important to just know sort of what's possible in terms of the funding that you've received. Pass-through funding. So this can be sort of a bit of a combination of all three of the prior ones. And these will typically be a lot of the funds, if you're applying for funding from DPHHS or the state, it's typically pass-through funding. So that means the federal government or an entity has funding that they've distributed to certain partners. So say the federal government has given the state of Montana a certain amount of money. Montana then will redistribute that funding to local entities. And so it's just important to note that, you know, you won't be in pass-through funding. You're not the direct recipient of the grant. So you're not the one that has submitted the proposal for that particular grant opportunity. You're not the one that's direct liaison with the ultimate grant project director, but you'll have a liaison of some sort in terms of who your funder is, which is typically the state in your case. And then foundation funding. So foundations provide, you know, private funding based on criteria that aligns with the foundation's vision, mission, purpose. And foundations can really distribute funding in a multitude of ways. Some foundations will put out competitive RFPs, or will have a competitive grant cycle that operates once or twice a year. Other foundations operate in an invite-only capacity, so they might have a really clear sense of what they're looking to fund, and they're doing their own scanning of who's doing that work, and they'll reach out to you, invite you to apply. And then other foundations might just have kind of a rolling open process where you're really able to reach out and say, hi, I'd like to connect. I have a program that I need like funded. I think your foundation might be a good fit. And it can be a bit more informal that way. It really depends on sort of the size and endowment of the foundation, their own capacity in terms of how they operate. And typically with foundation funding, you'll find that reporting requirements are less than, say, a federal grant, but oftentimes they're smaller dollar amounts too. So something to keep in mind. Okay, thanks, Kate. And so after talking about all of those different types of funding and different types of grant, we also want to emphasize the idea of diversifying your funding streams. And I'm sure you all have heard this before, and it's much easier to say than to do. So I will acknowledge that from the get-go, but it is something to always keep top of mind. When you're able to diversify funding streams so that you're not relying on, say, 1, 2, 3 sources to really support the bulk of your work, it really enhances the sustainability of your efforts when you have multiple diverse sources of funding to pull from. And it can also make you more competitive in grant applications. So when you're applying and you're able to say, we've leveraged these other types of funding, these other types of dollars that we anticipate supplementing the program or being able to maintain the program after grant funding ends, that can go a long way in a funder's eyes. And a lot of times within grant applications, you'll be asked to submit some sort of sustainability plan. So you'll have to speak to what is the plan once this grant funding runs out for you to maintain and sustain this work. And so if you're able to speak to sort of a multitude of different funding sources, that could be other grants, it could be local donations, it could be maybe county dollars that you have. it really can go a long way in making you more competitive. And another piece is also enabling you to secure required matches for grants. So sometimes a grant will require a match in order for you to be eligible. And those can look two different ways. It could be hard matches, bless you, Jeff. There can be hard matches, which are dollars. So with grants that have a hard match requirement, that's saying, okay, you're eligible for X amount of dollars so long as you pony up X amount of dollars. There can also be in-kind matches where you're able to say, you know, we speak to the value of some resources that you have, such as office space, or perhaps you have an internal evaluator that you can use for the grant that you aren't requesting funding for, where you can speak to that will support the grant program. And really ultimately diversifying funding streams enables you to like really maximize and leverage the dollars to go the farthest. So you could use grant dollars that can pay for, say, staffing, supplies, training, but federal grant dollars might not be able to be used for, say, capital costs or food. And so if you have other funding sources, you can really tap into those and make sure that overall your big picture of funding is really being maximized to the greatest extent. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now that we've reviewed a few basics, we're going to talk about how to determine if and when you should apply for a grant. So just in the chat, like based on your experience, how do you know if you should apply for a particular funding opportunity? Okay. Yeah, when you need the money. Yeah, that's a biggie too. Okay, awesome. And a lot of talk around capacity too. Okay, cool. Kate, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. Yeah, y'all are hitting on some biggies, absolutely. And so it's really just, I'm going to go over a few considerations. We're definitely going to go more into sort of how to adequately prep for a grant, but it's important to know just some basic parameters of the funding before you put like any time into an application. So there are some key items that can let you know straight away if this is an opportunity to pursue or to pass on. So a biggie is just how many awards will be released. Typically, a grant posting will give you a sense of if they plan to award, say, 3 or 5 awards, or they might plan to award like 40 to 60. And if you're a small entity and it's a big federal grant and it says it's going to award 5 entities, you're probably going to take pause and say, is that really realistic that we would be one of those successful entities within that competitive pool versus one that might be expecting to award a lot more? You're going to have a better chance of success. Federal, state, and local. So really just understanding if there are multiple entities that are eligible for the grant, how do you make sure you're checking in with those folks, either within your own community, or if there's a grant where both state and counties are eligible to apply. It's great to know to check in with the state and say, hey, are you going to take this on? Because you certainly don't want to put time into a competitive application if you might be able to coordinate with another partner. Funding floors and ceilings. So again, most opportunities will give you a sense of what's the dollar range, and more money is not necessarily better. You certainly want to make sure that the amount you're being awarded is going to cover the costs of what you're really aiming to do. But you also don't want to apply for a grant where you get way more money than you have the capacity to use, because that can impact your future funding opportunities. A lot of funders will take note if you have left a significant amount of money on the table. They might be less apt to fund you again in the future. Research risk program. So really understanding what's the purpose of the grant. Is this to support programming? Is it to support research? Research grants will oftentimes be a lot more hefty in terms of what you've got to put in and the expertise. So really just being aware of what the purpose of the grant is and if it meets your needs. Applicant resume. So this is really like what within your team and your scope and your expertise has prepared you to apply for this grant. So in applications, you really want to be able to speak to, we have this knowledge, this experience within our organization that will help facilitate this grant program and make it successful. And if you can speak to efforts that have already been done that really align with the program, align with the grant, that will go a long way. And vice versa, if you haven't, that might be a moment to sort of take pause and say, oh, do we have some legwork to do before we apply for this? And then lastly is eligibility criteria. So always making sure you're paying attention to deadlines. Nothing's more tragic than messing those up. And making sure you're planning ahead where you know that if it's due on the 15th, you're trying to be done by the 10th because things happen and pop up. Specific entities. So again, making sure you're eligible. Sometimes grants will be specific to 501c3s. Sometimes they'll be specific to tribes. And so knowing if you're eligible to apply versus it might be an opportunity to partner with another entity in your community if they're eligible and you're not, but you could collaborate. And then lastly, but probably most importantly, is capacity. So are you really considering what's realistic for your team to take on? And if the grant allows you to sort of build that capacity by, say, hiring someone, are you also paying attention to like what's realistic in terms of a hiring timeline within the timeline of the grant? And so always, always, always keeping in mind, is this something that's realistic for us to take on that we could be successful with? Okay. And with that, I think I'm handing it back to Kate.
All right. Thanks, Mary. So off of the consideration. Okay. I'm gonna just hide my screen in case that helps my bandwidth. Is that better?
We hear you.
All right. Okay, good. All right. So this is to go fast. So kind of building off of what Mary about a tool that can help you prepare for the funding. So it is not unusual it's not unusual for you to see a notice of funding opportunity or NOFO that hit your inbox, and those potential how am I doing?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. Those potential dollar signs that get you excited, and finally, this is an opportunity to really bring to life an idea that you had. And like I mentioned when I was starting, these grant opportunities will come in your inbox, and you're also navigating a bunch of your other work related tasks. So this hexagon tool can be a place where you can slow down and really apply for funding, as well as what you need to be successful. So
Okay. We'll jump back in. So hexagon tool picture here. This is really a strategy to help you think through your readiness to apply for funding, as well as what you need to be successful to launch an idea and then sustain the idea after the funding cycle ends. So the hexagon tool was developed by the National Implementation Research Network, or NIRN, to help communities and organizations assess the fit and feasibility when selecting new initiatives or programs to implement. So NIRN is guided by implementation science, which refers to the methods or techniques to enhance the adoption, implementation, and sustainability of an intervention. So implementation science in general helps us as public health professionals and educators, human service professionals, get what works into the hands of the folks who need it. And so the hexagon tool is a strategy to help you get smarter about proposal design so that you're wisely asking for funding and wisely launching and sustaining ideas. So the motto of this tool is go slow to go fast, which is what we emphasized at the beginning of this talk. So next two slides break down some elements of the hexagon tool. So need, evidence, and fit. So need is really a set of questions that helps you and your team think through who's the identified population, Who are you targeting, and what are the identified needs of these population? So for an example, if you want to launch a tobacco cessation program for youth, you drill down to the specific needs of this demographic. How do you describe the population of the youth? Are you targeting urban, frontier, rural, tribal youth? What's the need? What data do you need to collect and review that describes that need? So for example, you'd want to review your community's school YRBS data, the youth risk behavior surveillance data, which asks about cigarette smoking, vaping, including frequency of use, if they've tried to quit. And then if you're to implement your program, what could potentially change for this population? So really making sure you're very clear and drilling down in terms of what's your target, what are you trying to impact? Evidence. So while need encourages you to collect and review data that describes the need or scope of the program, the evidence questions really push you to review the evidence that your desired program or initiative will make a difference. So is there evidence to support its effectiveness? So again, as an example, if we're wanting to really implement efforts to reduce youth tobacco use, and we're targeting stronger local laws directed at retailers, enforcement of retailer sales law, retailer education enforcement. We know current evidence suggests that this community approach is effective. So at this stage, you also want to think through data, or what data you'll need to collect to ensure that the approach is working. And then fit is really a set of questions that helps you and your team think about how your program idea fits within the priorities of your department or organization. So does it align with your organizational priorities? Will it impact other initiatives? So again, if there are other tobacco cessation initiatives that you're running, are they for adults? Are they for youth? How will implementing this new idea impact what you already have going on? Does it align nicely, or does it perhaps contradict? And how does the program or practice fit within the community's history relevant to the identified need or focused population? How does it disrupt the community's history or systems? What's the potential impact of this fit or disruption? Like, how does your community view youth tobacco use? If it's not a big deal, we don't see it as a problem, or adults in the community are concerned and they're really fired up and want to see something happen. So we're going to ask you to just take a moment, think about a program that you hope to run or want to expand, and write down a couple thoughts on need, and specifically who's the target population, what is their need, how do you track down the data to describe the need, how can your program change things, how does it fit with what you're currently doing, does it align, enhance, contradict, and what's the evidence that supports your program or initiative idea. So take a couple minutes to jot those down, just respond to the prompts on this slide. And we'll use these thoughts a bit more in some breakout rooms that will facilitate. Nancy's, while y'all are jotting down some thoughts, Nancy's question: if a grant requires 501c3 and you are not one, but have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor, can you still apply? Yes. So if you have a fiscal sponsor that meets that criteria, you can absolutely work through them to apply. So the other sort of three pieces of the Hexagon tool are usability, capacity, and supports. So usability is really, is it a well-defined program? So are grant goals, objectives clear and doable? Is the community mobilization effort to reduce youth tobacco, are those efforts clear? Do you know what they entail? Will it be useful for your community and for youth? If applying for a grant, does your idea align with the focus of the grant? So are your objectives and goals clear, and do they make sense within the requirements of the grant and what the purpose of that grant is? And then what will fidelity look like? How will we know if you're maintaining fidelity, if you're implementing the program in the way that it was intended to get the outcomes that have been shown to be effective? And can it be replicated for other communities? So really thinking about, if you're trying to implement a program, is this something that can have some really long-term sustainable use? Can go a long way in making it relevant, important, and successful within a grant application. Capacity. So again, we've talked about this a bit, but we'll really hammer this. And so thinking about, do you have the staff and administrative capacity to support the initiative? Does your staff currently have the training needed to support the work? Are they equipped with that skills and knowledge that it will take to implement the program? And are there other communities or agencies, public health departments that you can collaborate with to effectively pull this off? So not only thinking about the capacity of your own staff, although that's really important, but thinking about what's the capacity of your partners, and are they willing to be involved? What could that look like? And then finally, supports. So really thinking about, what do you need to pull this off? Both thinking about things like staffing. Is it going to require a new position, or is this something that'll be taken on by existing staff? Are there training and professional development costs and needs? Are there costs to implement the program? Is there curriculum that you need to buy? Cost to collect and manage data. You really don't want to overlook what that can take. It can be hefty. So being thoughtful about really what are the resources you have that are going to enable you to evaluate. Marketing costs, and then what kind of community and staff buy-in do you need? That stuff doesn't necessarily take money, but it does take a lot of time. And so what's your capacity to do that? And then are you really drilling down in terms of what it will cost each year to run the program? Do you really have a strong sense of that? So that both within your application, you can speak to it, but you also have a sense of what will it take to sustain this? And then, so thinking through these aspects, these 6 aspects of the Hexagon tool really set you up for success, because you know what to ask for in your grant application, and you can be really thoughtful and wise in terms of your capacity and your efforts once you're funded. So I think, yeah. So we'll ask you to go back to your piece of paper and think through these questions around usability, capacity, and supports. And jot down, think about that program that you had in mind for the last questions. Is this a well-defined program? Are grant goals and objectives clear and doable? Can it be adapted for context and populations? Thinking about capacity, do you have the staff and administrative support to be successful with it? Does your staff currently have the training needed to support the work? And then what types of external assistance or resources would you need to be successful? So take some time, jot those down with that program or project that you have in mind. Take just 1 more minute, and then I believe Emily is going to help us get into some breakout groups. Okay, awesome. So we'll spend about 30 minutes in breakout groups, and they might be a bit large with the number of folks we have here, but we'll do our best. And within the breakout groups, we're really going to think through putting this Hexagon tool to use. So we'll go through sort of each aspect of the Hexagon tool and let folks kind of think through their program or idea that they have in mind, and how they can use the Hexagon tool to assess if it's a good program project they're ready to take on. So,
Can you remind me, did you say 35 minutes?
Yeah, 35 minutes works.
Excellent.
Okay. Yeah, Kate, are you there and available?
I am both here and available.
Okay.
Yes.
We don't want to leave one group.
And I'm just so thankful that I have such a great team. So you just jump right on in. So there you go, people. That's just good teaming.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you'll see an invite to rooms pop up. And to my presenters, you have been assigned rooms too.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
All right. I'll start talking until I'm unstable, and then Mary or Jeff, you just jump on in. So want to just take a moment before we switch gears to talk about grant writing. Is what came up in your group, and what are some of the themes you noticed, and how, I know, is this hexagon tool something that folks feel like they're able to kind of conceptualize, and how does it fit with other models or thinking that's already going on? Jeff, do you want to share any?
Sure. I just would be open, and as I encouraged in our group, anyone who wants to just jump in and say a sentence, please feel free to. With the time, we were able to kind of go through each of the areas, and I think folks kind of understood how it connects to their projects, both from writing a grant and kind of getting ready to submit a grant, or having received one, or other projects implementing pieces. So that showing that capacity to implement being a very important piece of selling what your project is. We had some great examples for addressing opioid crisis, behavioral health needs in rural communities, looking at tobacco prevention, autism fitness certification program. So some members of the group are working on some pretty exciting projects, and hopefully it was useful for them to kind of move those forward.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Mary, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say, I think we sort of naturally found ourselves kind of flowing from one area to the next, as we were talking about evidence, it sort of naturally led us into a conversation around fit, and sort of all the way around. And really like several examples around some pitfalls that folks have experienced with grants and with programs that maybe potentially could have been mitigated if there had been some more time sort of spent thinking through some of these pieces, or at least maybe but more awareness or a strategy around how to navigate those pitfalls when they came up. So
great. Same in our group, and one person said, "Oh, this is how I think about this naturally." So it's nice that there's a framework for this. So I thought that was pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and pass it on to Jeff to get going here.
All right. So, hi, everybody. It's nice to be able to be here today and to do this stuff with you. I told folks in our group that some of the stuff as we go through this, and certainly in this next section, some of the stuff will start to repeat, or at least by design, we're hoping it starts to repeat itself, and that each of you start to see some themes of things that you do well, things that are challenges, and that we think that, I'll put you over here so I can see you better. We think that that repetition, we're hoping that you start to see personal themes and take notes for those as you go through, because we're going to be open to hear those, and then as we move into next week, it's going to be important for us to be able to focus in on stuff that's going to be most helpful for you guys. So this next section, I've been asked to, we'll be talking about just the nuts and bolts of writing a grant and the different challenges and the types of things. Now, some of you have significant grant writing experience. Some of you have zero. So if you would put in the chat and take a minute to write down what are some of the tips and challenges that you've had. And if you've never written a grant, you could even describe what are some of the fears that you have that we come to. So the first question, and we can do I like Kate's cascading kind of waterfalling approaches. So we'll have you write it and then we'll push enter. So what's your best tip for writing the grant? What's the best thing you could tell folks who've never done one about writing a grant? Stephanie, I'm going to come back to your question about writing a check from your own checkbook, but don't let me lose that question. Stacy, not sure where to start. Good. Maybe we can cover that a little bit. Don't get intimidated by the process. Open a Word document, brainstorm your program staff strengths, just start writing stuff. So a little bit of just do it. Just jump in and do it. Answer every single item. Yes. Don't skip stuff. Find your hook, something that will be unique that no one else will have. Excellent. Why are you special? Why should I fund you? No, stole Stephanie's. Connect with a seasoned writer to ask a few questions that will possibly help. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Cool. Kate, next question on there. There you go. Your biggest challenge when writing the grant, and some have already spoke a little of that, is like getting started, knowing where to start. What else? Time. Keeping track of the time. Time and energy. Well, knowledge. Knowing about what you're writing about and what you're trying to do, especially if you're jumping into new space. What other challenges have people had? I think that time and energy is such an important piece, especially folks that get pushed into the grant writing world that have a job and have another job, or doing it as besides their job for a personal interest or a not-for-profit that they may be affiliated with. And we talk a lot about time management in the work world, and leadership and management, and that time is the real commodity. And I'm glad to see Anna put in energy, because managing energy is equally and maybe even more important than managing time, because we really have to look at not just our physical energy, but our mental and emotional energy, our spiritual energy. It's really how we bring those to bear and how we maximize our energy that leads to performance and gives us the opportunity to do things like jump into grant. Yes, team. Ashley, always ask, find other people. Compiling all the pieces into a smooth flowing document that makes sense. We're going to talk about editing. We're going to talk about what the reader's experience is, and keeping the reader's experience in mind. If I give you a copy of my grant and ask you to read it, I should look at you. And if you start falling asleep and nodding off and having to reread sentence, I better do some editing. I better make this smooth flowing. I better make this a little better to be looking at. Is the grant a good match for your project and agency and alignment? This is I think Stacy put up the point of I'm not sure where to start. And someone in the comments put it, and I think it's good, is what are we trying to do? And one of the first considerations and one of the important pieces of anything is what we'll keep talking about are problem statements, is getting very clear about what it is you are trying to do. And then there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg challenge of, is it finding the grant before, or how does that come first? You really want to know what it is you're setting off to do. You want to know what your organization's goal is, what the grant is all about. And so going back through the hexagon tool, which is just really an excellent way to frame getting yourself to answer that question. When you have a project in mind, and I said this to the group earlier, the reader of your grant is going to be looking to see, is this a good project? Is this seem like something that's worth doing? Is this something that seems like when they say this is going to meet a need in their community, does it have all those pieces that we talk about in the hexagon tool? Is it a fit? Do I like it? At a fundamental level, your reader is going to be saying, do I like this? Is it something that I think is good? Then the reader is going to be charged by whoever their money they're representing. Does it align with what we're trying to fund? Does this fit with what we're trying to fund? So as you get started, you want to have a very clear picture. The goal of grants, a lot of people will think the purpose of the grant is to get money, and that is where we want to start and finish. But it might be where we want to finish is to get the money. But I would advise and recommend that you don't start with we're just chasing after dollars into grant world. And when you get on that train of just chasing dollars, it can be hard, it can be confusing. And much like many experiences I've had, you're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to put a lot of work and effort and research and time into writing grants, and you're going to find out that it didn't really align with the agency that you were talking to. You want to be sure that that agency isn't going to just say, well, this is a great idea. you need to do the research and find out that it is something that's going to fit for them. And then you really need to know that you have the capacity, that your agency is aligned well, and that your agency is a good match, because we could actually get this done. We can actually forward the mission of the people who want to spend this money, who want to give these grants, to move forward. So the last bullet point up there, super important, reaching out to the funder. You want to tie your program, your proposal, to the funder's interests. And you need to understand what that interest is. You need to know that what you're doing is going to develop evidence and is going to be a fit for what they want to do. You can look at previous grants. So a good place to start, if you've got a problem, you got a need, you think you're going to go after grant money. Mary's going to talk a little bit about how to find a good match and how to find a potential funder once you have that problem. But so you have that grant in front of you, look at their website, go find out, research them, give them a phone call, talk to a program. They'll call them oftentimes they call them program officers, program managers, grant managers. Ask for that person. What kind of things do they fund? Who do they like to work with? Get some relationship. Be curious about them. Learn as much as you can about that grant agency. Ask all the questions in the world. Do you guys fund this? Do you fund that? Do you fund the other? Do you like agencies like mine? Do you like projects like mine? With some big grants and big agencies, it's a little bit harder to get a specific person, but often you can. But another advantage with some of the bigger agencies and foundations and grants is they'll often post the proposals that they funded in the past. And that's another great way to reach out and to learn about your funder, is see what they funded. And sometimes they'll post the exact proposals that were submitted. Oftentimes it's just an abstract that describes it, but it starts to give you a flavor of, oh, look, they fund every year, they've been funding this and this and this going back several years. You start to get a feel for what's going on there. Let's jump to the next slide. This is great strategies. Again, those of you that are saying, I just don't know where to get started. Again, you want to start with what it is you're proposing to do. What is your problem statement, and what you need to have happen. Then as you find a match, and again, I'm going to defer that to Mary for later, and you have a grant that you're actually going for, you've got to read the grant. The number one thing, if you take anything home today, and make a sign to yourself for grants, is following the grant instructions. Answer the questions on the grant, do what the grant is asking for. Make a worksheet, map out the data and information that the grant asks for, not what you think you have, not what you think is your best thing, not the clever idea or the different way of approaching it that you might approach it. The people who've put out the money have written the grant in the way they've written it for a reason. They have a desire to get the data and information that they've put in the application. Don't assume that they know anything about you. Don't assume that they're gonna, don't assume that they understand your acronyms. Don't assume that they understand the way you collect information. Don't assume that your information is more important and viable and valuable than the information that they're asking for. And I'll repeat that last one. Don't assume that the information that you have, even if you think it's better, even if you think it's a better way to answer their questions, even if you think it's more compelling and more relevant data, you might be able to work your stuff into the grant proposal. And sometimes that's smart, but never at the expense of what they've asked for. Follow the instructions, follow the instructions, follow the instructions. Read the grant over 5 times. Make a map, make a worksheet that captures every bit of data and information that they're asking for. And then start a checklist. Start gathering the information. Start preparing your grant right from when you read it, right early on. One of the mistakes, a beginner mistake that I've made many times, and you're not supposed to repeat your beginner mistakes, is saving a lot of the supporting documents and the pieces you need for the end. Oh, I'll get to that. I'm just going to write the main parts now and get my idea ironed out. If I need 10 letters of support from a coalition in my community, get that started right away. Get gathering the information I need. And then, as it says here, make a checklist. Look onto the grant. What am I going to need to do to get done? What supporting documents do I need? Some federal grants require you get into what's called the SAMS system, which is a federal payment system. If it says you need to do that and you've never heard of what SAMS is, look it up. And I'm not going to go into the details of that now, but there's going to be things like that. Google it, ask a friend, ask someone who you think knows. That can take you a month sometimes to wade into the kind of federal data pool. And SAMS, this example, is just a payment piece that comes from the federal government and creates some assurances. So gather a checklist and grab all of those things. It's never too early to start on the details and kicking those out of the way. Sometimes the main content of your grant will come together more as you get to the end of it, and it's easier to fix that. It's really hard if you wait to the end to get the supporting documents and the other pieces together. That can be a real stressor. Next slide. Who can help you? Don't go this on your own. Writing a grant is there are some people, there are grant writers out there who hide away in the corner of their homes or in the hollows of your basements or in your offices and just kind of crank these grants out. If you're new to grant writing, don't do that. Don't reinvent what other people have done. Bring in people who have experience, bring in people who can write you, help do different parts, make assignments, hand them back and forth, proofread and edit. I cannot overestimate the importance of having stuff written simply. Use plain language, clear language, concise, stay away from jargon. Have people read it. Have people read it that are not even involved in the work that you're doing, to see if it's clear. I used the example earlier. Do they fall asleep? Are they yawning while they're reading your proposal? Well, then you need to spice it up a little bit. Are they rereading sentences? Well, then you need to shorten the sentence and make that easier for them to read. Imagine, if you would, you're a grant reader and you've got 30 of these proposals on your desk. You've got to have a way to get someone to stick with yours, get your points, get in quick, get specific, give them your data, give them your narrative, and move in, move out. So have proofreaders, editors, budget people. Budget is super important. Get people who can help you write a budget. Don't be afraid to talk about money. Don't be afraid to ask for the money. Don't be afraid to best guess what often they'll tell you how much they're going to spend. They're going to say, this grant can be between up to $50,000. You don't have to do $49,999 on purpose. But what you want to do is make sure you're demonstrating the capacity to do what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to hire 10 people to canvass the state and develop materials and go door to door to do education on vaccinations, and that you've assigned a 0.25 FTE to be in charge of getting all those people hired and the materials made and put them on the streets, as your reader, I'm going to say that budget doesn't cover what they need. They can't get that done. So don't put that in there. And at the same time, don't add fluff when you do your narrative. And then this is something your editor can call out for you. Don't add weak, inaccurate, unsure data. Don't add controversial data that your readers can say, I don't think that's true, or I've read that before and I'm not sure about that. Be very confident that what you said is accurate, clear, concise, no padding, no fluff. You don't need to add flowery language, flowery description. Don't forget, I'm getting through 30 or 40 of these, and I just want to know, what the heck are you going to do? Do you have the capacity to do it? Does the money work? Do I think you're good at it? Do you understand the problem you're trying to solve, or you're going to get a chance to solve it? Create a schedule. Great idea. Put together a table. It's know when it's due. Plan to have it 100% done a week before, because you're never going to get it done on time. You're always going to have last minute things. You're going to have things that didn't come through. Many of us wait till the last minute and have intermediate due dates. Hold yourselves to those deadlines. The deadline is real. There was a bid in Helena that I witnessed that was public. Is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana had the state insurance for the state of Montana, not a small contract, to be the insurance provider for every Montana state employee. They wrote the proposal to renew their contract. It was due at 5 o'clock on a Thursday, I believe it was. The proposal was done in Helena they thought, oh, this is easy, we'll just turn it in that day. The guy who was delivering it from the Blue Cross Blue Shield office across town to the Department of Administration got waylaid on the way and got there at 5 after 5. Blue Cross Blue Shield lost the insurance contract for the state of Montana. Not because they might have had the better bid or the worst bid, but they lost literally millions and millions of dollars worth of a contract that they had been. Deadlines matter, the timeline matters. Submitting things electronically, everything is timestamped. There's no sneaking it in over the end. There's no sneaking it in. There's no asking for extra favors. Create a schedule, stick to that schedule. Next slide. Most common error, what do you think? Cut and paste, good. Not enough, and not enough info is what I would define as not including all of the sections and all of the parts that they ask for. As we get into this in the next couple of days, or the next day, we're going to be talking about complete proposals. You have to answer every section. You want to be, this is good, Mary, clear and concise, specific, and in every section. Mary mentioned earlier that you'll see in grants that they have scoring that is section by section. And so one might be 25% of the score is for organizational capacity, 50% is for your problem statement, 10% is for your narrative, 10% for your evaluation. Pay close attention to that. If I tell you that the evaluation of your grant is 5% of the points, and that 80% of the points is the problem statement, this is an obvious question, but which one are you going to spend more time on, and which is going to be a longer section and more detailed and more specific in your grant? Obviously, the problem statement. Other grants are going to have 80% evaluation and 5% problem statement. And if you don't spend a lot of time being very clear and specific and give them a lot about evaluation in that 80% example, you're missing the point. You have to give them what they are asking for. Even if you think the most important part is evaluation, if they say it's only 5 or 10%, it's not the most important part for this grant. Might be your strength, might be what you think is the best thing and most important thing in the world. You have to do what they've asked. So I think the most common error is not following the instructions. The most common error is not answering the questions they ask. We all want to be clever. But you need to be clever because you need to have a hook. Someone mentioned that earlier. You need to write it in a way that the readers, what you write is going to jump out. So you need to have a hook, but you don't want to be cute. You don't want to be so cute that a reader is going to roll their eyes when they read it, or just think you're silly. And you certainly don't want to risk offending a reader that suggests that you know more about what they're asking for than they do. And so as soon as you stray from what they're asking and say, that's all good and well that you asked for it, but let me tell you what you really ought to know, they are the ones with the money. They're going to decide what they really want to know. You need to follow what they've said. Other people mentioned the editing, grammar, grammatical errors. I've said it a few times. If I have to read a sentence twice or 3 times because it's grammatically and because there's colons and commas and I can't follow what it all is, conversational. Write conversationally. I have a terrible time with my writing with run-on sentences. Clear, concise language, active language. Here is what we are going to do. Let me finish just with a concept of thinking about your audience. Let's see, I made a note to myself. There's some, and I'm going to finish here. When you think, again, one of my number one themes here I want you to take away is think about your reader. In Greek rhetorical writing, they talk about these Greek words logos, ethos, pathos, and kairos, and those are just fancy Greek words but they talk about different readers are going to have different focuses, and when you get to try to know your grantee, the person you're writing to, you want to get a flavor of which one they are. Logos is the Greek word for word. And that word is used by, as I first learned it from my teenage kids, when you would say something and they would say word. meaning truth, meaning speaking data. Some people want to be appealed by logic, data. You want to give them facts. You want to give them all of those pieces in the world. You don't want to go too far that way, but if you don't give them facts and data, we have a meth problem in our community. There were 25% increased in arrests last month. You need to give them the facts, and you don't want to exaggerate them. Ethos is the Greek word for character. And character is really about your credibility. And that's who your partners are. And that's, you're standing as an organization, your organizational capacity, who your partner is. If I'm writing a grant to the National Institute of Health, I probably want to have a doctor is being part of my team. I probably want to have partners for a medical school, university, academic setting. I want to be credible in the eyes of the reader. If I'm a small foundation that appeals to community people and are looking for the character and credibility of someone who really knows the community, then I better write about my ties to the community. And my credibility comes from being local and involved in this community and understanding the nature of the problem better than anyone. It doesn't come from having initials after my name. So you have to read to know, so credibility isn't always who's got the most initials. It's understanding who's going to be reading it and what they want. Pathos is emotion. We all tend to fall into this one. And sometimes, depending on our funder, we need to recognize there's emotion. And pathos is about emotion. And we do need to understand that. And as the example, meth is a huge problem. That's an emotional piece. We all know meth is a huge problem. But what does huge mean? We need to have, we might appeal to some because they're emotionally triggered by the idea of hugeness. But really what we need to do is back that up and maybe put both and identify this is how we know because of this increase. Again, example, there are hundreds of people are negatively affected by radon. Well, how do we know that? How is that credible? I'm just kind of making that as a bold assertion at that point. I need to be more credible and put that out there, back myself up with some credible pieces. And probably in most cases, we want to stay away in written RFPs and written proposals from pathos. When we're doing talking arguments, sometimes we can appeal to emotion with people more. It's persuasive for some. Again, we need to know our audience. The last of those Greek kind of prompts is kairos. Kairos is timing, is what's hot right now, is kind of reading what's hot for a foundation, what you're applying for, what's hot in your community in terms of what should be funded, and really being alerted and attuned with what matters and what's important, what's in the news, what are people wanting to fund, what are people caring about. That changes, that comes and goes. Looking at the issue of the day matters, and looking at what your funder thinks the issue of the day is. That's part of the research that you want to do into your funders. And I better wind up there because I'm bound to use more time that's probably allotted for me. But as we get to the end, I think there'll be room for questions. And that jumps back to Mary to talk to you about, well, how do I find these grants in the first place?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. And I'll go over this today, but I think we'll start, just because of time, we'll start next session where I'll do sort of a quick run through on grants.gov of how to search for things. But for today, I'll just kind of go over these real fast. So in terms of looking for funding opportunities, federal grant opportunities will all be on grants.gov. So it's a nice centralized spot for federal grant opportunities. I am assuming, I made an assumption that most folks would sort of fall under opportunities provided by Department of Ed, Health and Human Services, and Justice. And so sometimes you might have funding opportunities come out of unexpected places that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of. Department of Justice will put out a lot of grants related to behavioral health that you might not have sort of thought about before. So keeping an open mind. like I said, we'll start next week. I'll sort of pull up grants.gov and just show a little walkthrough of how to search for things, use keywords, sort of key items that you can look for in grant announcements to give you a good sense of, is this something that would make sense for me? Or right away, am I sort of can be aware of this isn't something that's going to work for our organization. State of Montana. So when the state puts out grants, those are all done through EMAX, which is the state's RFP system. For those of you who have experience applying for a state grant, I apologize in advance for EMAX, because it is sort of the quintessential state system that doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense and can be really cumbersome. So you will have to register within a vendor portal. And then you can sort of create a profile where you can then mark, they call them commodity codes, but essentially you can then put down like these are the subject areas that are relevant to me and my organization, the work we do, so that when grant opportunities are released by the state, you will then get notice when they're tagged with those codes. So say your organization is interested in behavioral health or prevention work, you'll be able to put those tags on so that when an opportunity arises, you'll be on that list to get alerted. Another piece, I know we've got some health department folks in the room, in the virtual room today. And so another thing to be aware of with the state is that they have both contracts and task orders, but actually if you're a health department, you have a little leg up where DPHHS has what's called a master contract with all health departments. And you can then apply and have a task order, which is essentially a little amendment to that master contract. That's a great way if you are talking to the state, if you're talking to DPHHS about potential funding. Contract specialists at the state love the idea of task orders over contracts because they're much shorter. So if you're a health department, work that angle if you're talking to the state about potential funding opportunities, because you can have a bit more of a leg in, it's a bit less on their end. And then foundations. So in Montana, the Montana Nonprofit Association publishes Montana Foundation Directory. That's really handy. We have a link to it here. And then there are also search engines. So if you're really trying to look at foundation funding nationwide, you can search for foundations that typically have funded within Montana, funded within the subject area that you're working in. But there are also search engines that you can subscribe to. I would say if you're a small nonprofit, the cost of that might not be worth it. But if there's potential to partner with other folks, to partner with agencies, if you have an umbrella organization, it might be something worthwhile to pursue so that you can be alerted to sort of a variety of opportunities. And then I'll just make the plug for the center resource. We have a highlighted grant funding opportunities page on our website that we keep up to date, and it's certainly not exhaustive, but it's really us sort of identifying what are upcoming funding opportunities that have relevance for the folks we generally work with in health and social services. And we've got sort of information up there of upcoming grants, and we try to keep that updated as much as possible. So these are all live links. You will get these slides out afterwards, and I encourage you to bookmark that as just another sort of tool in your back pocket. Okay, and then this grant writing planning worksheet. So this is something that we will, Emily will send out after this call. She will send out the slides, and she'll also send out this document. And so our ask of you is to spend a little time before the next call to start mapping some of this out. So think about a program that you have in mind that you would like to implement. and just start kind of going through or filling out this worksheet so that you can start to have a sense. Next time, we will go into more depth around how to really write the grant application. And if you've put some time and effort into this and just have some initial ideas and information down, that'll be a much more enriching experience for the next time. You'll just be able to pull on that for activities that we do. So with that, I think we've got just a couple minutes left and some time for questions. Looks, Jeff, you've got a question around buzzwords in the chat.
Oh, let me look.
How do you feel about buzzwords?
I don't like them. You know, there are some, you know, it's kind of a depends. You don't want to fill your grant up with jargon and too many buzzwords. You know, they can be overused very quickly. If there is a catchy word, when I talked about kind of timeliness, and there's some kind of a buzzword that's in our news or in our vernacular right now that's kind of stirring thought, and you think that that's going to be a hook or connect with your reader, then it's not a hard no 100% of the time. But if you fill up with jargon or buzzwords, one, they may not know it. You don't want to assume that the reader knows as much about this as you might think they do. So you might use buzzwords that just kind of are off-putting because they don't know what the hell you're talking about. And then the other thing, if it's jargony, they think you're, you know, just tell me what you're going to do and what you think. Don't pepper it with buzzwords. I don't know, Mary, you might have something else to add to that. And sometimes you might hear both of us say, no, I put lots of buzzwords in. So it can cut either way.
Yeah, and I think as somebody who's had to review many a grant proposal, I think the more you can use super straightforward, plain language where there's just no ambiguity in what you're talking about, the better. The more clear, concise, direct you can be is the best route. Okay.
Any other
Emily,
questions?
yeah, I was going to say, anything to wrap up?
No, we'll do an evaluation at the end of next week. So we'll hold off on that for today. And I'll be sending out these resources like Mary said. And I certainly just want to thank Mary, Jeff, and Kate. Technology issues aside.
Oh my God.
Oh, you gotta love it. But thank you everyone for attending. If you have any other additional questions, please ask. But that's all we have for you today.